Chapter 3 Seeds of the Garden. Their garden was not measured in hectares or yield, it was measured in joy. Tucked behind the house on Kiunga Ridge, the garden had started as little more than a patch of stubborn dirt and brittle grass. But season by season, it transformed into something sacred. Rows of mint and rosemary flanked tomatoes heavy on the vine. Bougainvillea crept along the walls like bright confetti, flung from the hands of invisible celebrants. Butterflies came like scripture, bees like gentle prophets. What they couldn't eat, they composted. What they couldn't use, they gave. Every plant had a name, and every tree a story. Beneath a fruit-laden guava tree, Amina sat most evenings on a kitenge blanket, her voice rising in soft cadence as she read aloud to the children. Their favorite book was a collection of folk tales from the region of Muzani, where the sun was said to rest in the curve of the land each night. Once, there was a girl who planted seeds in secret, Amina read, her voice carrying over the garden's hush. Each one whispered a wish into the soil. She didn't know what would grow, but the earth did. The children listened with round, sleepy eyes, their bodies nestled against her sides, the scent of crushed basil drifting up from their fingers. Nearby, Lindiwe crouched among the beds, hands in the earth, pulling weeds with the patience of someone tending to her own childhood. Her wrap skirt was streaked with dirt. A straw hat shielded her eyes from the fading sun. She spoke to the plants like they were old friends, or perhaps forgotten family. "Pole, my girl," she murmured to a sunburnt kale leaf. "Too much light this week will shift you to a shadier patch." Sometimes she hummed as she worked, low rhythmic melodies from the hill songs of Maporomoko, where women wove lullabies into millet fields. Each morning began the same. Amina watered the leafy beds, whispering blessings her grandmother had once chanted over tomato plants on her Majiwa Bahari balcony. Lindiwe checked the soil's pH with strips of paper, then adjusted their compost heap like an alchemist. The children had their own tasks. Jabari guarded the chameleons that lived near the sweet potato vines, naming each one after a different color of the rainbow. Nyasha, armed with a tiny spade and oversized sun hat, sang to the marigolds and planted her dreams in bottle caps pressed into the dirt. On Fridays, they harvested tomatoes as round as moons, mint that bit the air with coolness, ginger pulled like treasure from the ground. "We grow what we love," Amina often said, inspecting the sage like a jeweler inspecting a gem. "Even when the world tries to uproot it," Lindiwe
always added, wiping her hands on her wrap. They meant the plants, of course, but they also meant themselves and their children, and the idea that queer black women could live in peace on their own land, loving each other openly beneath an African sun that refused to judge. Not everyone who passed through the garden came for produce. Some came for tea or stories. Others came in silence, unsure of why they'd been drawn, but knowing they were welcome. Zawadi, the neighbor's daughter, often lingered after her chores were done, sketching the sunflowers in charcoal on old maize sacks. Mzee Dongo dropped by once a month with a bundle of lemongrass and tales from his youth. And once, even Babu Chalo came, not to speak, just to sit, drinking tamarind water from a carved gourd while watching the wind tease the cassava leaves. One evening, while beneath the guava tree, the light turned amber, falling like honey across the ridge. Amina closed the book and set it aside. The children had already drifted into soft chatter and drawings in the dust. Lindiwe came over and sat beside her, knees brushing. "Today I saw the first pawpaw bloom," she said. "The one we thought wouldn't make it." Amina leaned her head on Lindiwe's shoulder. Even stubborn things grow with the right touch. They sat in silence. Then, from behind the fence, they heard singing, low and melodic. A group of young women from the nearby cooperative, passing by on the path home, their voices braiding together in a harmony that sounded older than language. Nyasha looked up and whispered, "Mama, the garden is singing back." Amina smiled, kissed her daughter's cheek. "No, Toto, that's the land remembering your name." In the garden, they grew. They grew garlic, they grew memory, they grew each other. And as night fell, and the last of the bees disappeared into their hive, Amina whispered into the dark, "Let what we plant outlive the fear." And Lindiwe answered, "Let it bloom in wild defiance." Their garden had become more than a place. It was a living archive. A place where roots remembered and hands restored. But even sacred places attract shadows. It began with tire tracks. One morning, Amina noticed them near the edge of their boundary. 2 deep grooves in the dust, leading toward the guava tree. The children hadn't played there. No neighbor had passed through. The tracks were fresh. She called Lindiwe over. They stood side by side in the rising light, eyes narrowed. Then Amina spoke up. "Someone came through last night." Running her fingers through her hair, Lindiwe responded, "Maybe they were lost." But they both knew better. That evening, Amina walked the perimeter with Jabari in tow. Near the northwest edge, where the wild mint grew thick and untamed, she found something else. A wooden stake jammed into the ground. Tied to it was a laminated paper sheet with an embossed seal. Notice of land interest, pending review by Tundani County Council. Her heart slowed. The next morning, they took the dusty path down to the ward office in Nyondo, the administrative town that handled land records for Kiunga Ridge. The clerk on duty, young, harried, and clearly underprepared, flipped through physical files, then a battered laptop. "Ah, yes," he mumbled. "Plot K47. That's under re-evaluation due to historic boundary uncertainty." "There was no uncertainty when we bought it. We have the documents, the deeds. The community signed off," Amina barked. Lindiwe added, "This land was sold to us with full consent and no contest. What changed?" The clerk hesitated. "There's a claim filed by someone who says part of this land was wrongfully transferred, a distant cousin of the original owner, apparently." Amina, now irritated, began raising her voice. "There's no cousin. Babu Chalo said himself he had no heirs." The clerk looked uncomfortable. Sometimes people appear when land gets valuable. Back at home, tension fell like smoke. Lindiwe paced the veranda, chewing her lip. "They want the ridge for development. You saw the drone last week? That wasn't from the cooperative. That was a contractor." Amina sat with her head in her hands. "We can't lose this. This isn't just a garden, it's our whole life." That night, the air felt tighter. The guava tree no longer swayed as gently. Even the bees were restless. Days later, they found the southern fence cut clean through. A row of eggplants uprooted. A strange chalk mark painted on the compost barrel. They didn't talk about it in front of the children, but the tension seeped in. Nyasha asked, "Why are the plants sad?" Jabari wouldn't sleep without both mothers at his side. But the land had a memory, and the people did too. Word spread through Wavuli Circle, the queer cooperative that had helped them build. A week later, friends from across the province began to show up. Artists, farmers, healers, midwives, even Mama Halima from Mji Mpana came carrying a bundle of neem leaves and legal advice. They gathered around the guava tree. Zawadi, now studying architecture, pulled out a large-scale sketch of the property. "We map it, we archive it, every route, every path, every memory. We give this land a voice. Mzi Adongo stood, leaning on his cane. You gave us food when we were hungry. Now we stand between you and the ones who hunger for power. Amina and Lindiwe wept that night, not from fear, but from the flood of knowing they were not alone. Even the children took matters into their own hands. They made handmade signs from old cardboard and kitchen markers, then stuck them in the soil like banners. This garden loves us. You can't evict the sun. Go away, greedy ghosts. One morning, they caught a local official sneaking onto the land with a measuring tape. Lindiwe walked out slowly, holding a watering can. Smiling coldly, she said, "Careful where you step. Some roots remember." The man didn't come back. And still, they grew. Despite the tension, they kept planting. More basil, more spinach, a second guava tree for the children. Bougainvillea over the fence, defiant and bright. "We don't stop growing just because someone's watching," Amina said. In the end, the claim vanished. Withdrawn, unsubstantiated. A misfiling, the clerk said. But everyone knew. Someone had tested them and failed. The garden swayed gently in the wind. The family sat beneath the stars, shelling peas. Zawadi's new trellis glowed silver in the moonlight. Amina kissed Lindiwe's hand. "You think the land forgives us for being afraid?" Lindiwe looked up at the guava tree, its branches heavy with green fruit. "No," she whispered. "I think it forgives us for needing to remember that we belong." And the garden, alive and wild and whispering, agreed. When the season's end came, the garden pulsed with life, like it knew it had survived something. Despite droughts, rumors, and shadows at the fence, everything had bloomed. The pawpaws hung like lanterns. Okra stood tall like green fingers reaching skyward. The marigolds, planted by Nyasha, burst gold at the edges of the garden beds like miniature suns. It was Lindiwe who said, one morning with dew on her ankles and a full basket on her hip, "We need to thank the land, not just harvest her." And so the idea was born, a wildflower harvest day. But not like the village market harvests, not full of prices and profit. This would be for healing, for reclaiming joy, for memory, for the people who held them when they nearly crumbled. In the week leading up, the house became a hive. Jabari made flyers from recycled paper spelling "Harvest Party" in colorful crayon letters. Nyasha went around collecting stories from neighbors to be read aloud at the circle. Amina cooked for 3 days straight, jars of mango chutney, grilled eggplant, flatbreads filled with lentils and wild herbs, hibiscus jelly, turmeric tea, roasted ground nuts, dusted with cinnamon. Her hands never stopped moving. Lindiwe organized the space beneath the guava trees into a semicircle of straw mats, floor cushions, and hanging lanterns. She strung poems between branches using string and clothespins. They fluttered like prayer flags in the wind. People came from all over Tundani province. From Umjimpana came Mama Halima, balancing a pot of smoked tilapia on her head and laughing at the sun. From Maporomoko, Lindiwe's cousin, Tando, arrived with a hand drum and old grief in her eyes. From the Wavuli circle, a whole caravan, queer elders, barefoot poets, farmers with calloused palms, and 2 trans herbalists who offered body balm and laughter in equal measure. The scent of roasted maize and mint filled the air. Children ran barefoot through the basil beds. Someone started playing a kalimba. Someone else brought honey wine. And before long, people were singing, soft, layered songs in forgotten dialects, prayers and lullabies braided into chorus. Amina stood back, watching it all with a fullness in her chest. "This," she whispered, "is the garden." As dusk fell and the fire was lit, Lindiwe called everyone to the circle. The garden grew quiet, the kind of quiet that holds breath and waiting. They began with silence, 1 long minute for the land. Then, one by one, people stood and shared what they were releasing into the soil. "I release shame," said a young woman whose family had cast her out. "I release fear of being too soft," said a man with a sun-scarred face and tears in his eyes. "I release the silence I kept when my friend needed me," said an elder, voice trembling. The air thickened, not with sadness, but with honesty. Then came the seed bowl, a simple calabash filled with seeds from the garden: kale, pumpkin, beans, basil. Each person took one. "When you plant it," Lindiwe said, "remember what you've let go. And remember that growth begins in the dark." Amina stepped forward last. "I release the idea that we must always prove our worth," she said. "We belong, without apology, without permission." They buried a small bundle of herbs in the fire: mugwort, lavender, lemongrass. And the smoke rose like a song without words. Before the last lantern burned out, they danced, barefoot, hand in hand. A drum beat like a heartbeat. Children swayed, half asleep in their parents' arms. Even Mzi Adongo clapped along, his laughter catching on the wind. When the guests finally left, some by motorbike, some by moonlight path, they left behind stories carved in soil, memories clinging to the guava leaves like dew. Lindiwe and Amina stood in the quiet that followed, wrapped in each other's arms, children asleep inside, the scent of smoldering herbs lingering in the air. "Do you think the land felt it?" asked Amina. "The land never forgets," Lindiwe replied. They stood beneath the wild stars, surrounded by marigolds and mint, tomato vines and truth. And in the stillness of their garden, now baptized in song, laughter, and smoke, a soft wind whispered, "Grow, still, again, always."
This is QueerAfrique, where African queer stories bloom boldly. Subscribe to witness more. Share this story and let's gather around the fire. Until next time.